and participant. Thank you for agreeing to have the meeting recorded. It will be helpful for the others that don't make it. So just a brief introduction about myself. The topic that we had and the lens that I'm looking at is because of my prior experience. And so over the past few decades, that has gone from management consulting in the US as well as the Middle East to private equity in West Africa from a Ghana base, as well as investing. So investing in small, very small businesses. So this is where my entrepreneur hat comes on. So with my husband, we've invested in an entertainment center that failed and we shut it down. We have a hydroponics farm that's still running. We also have a food service company. It's a ghost kitchen, and we supply companies and individuals with meals as well. And then I've also invested in a biomedical company as well as a shoe manufacturing company. And these are all very small businesses that are now growing. And so that's where my entrepreneur hat comes in as an angel investor for some of them. This is the biomedical company and the shoe manufacturing company, and then as an entrepreneur with the food service and farm company. So that's sort of the lens with which I have created the course content for you, because in my day job as a private equity investor, I have to interact with a lot of transaction advisors, and I've learned a lot about your business and your role, and sort of seeing the good, the bad, and the ugly. So what we'll do is we'll go through the course content. I'd like us to use the Chatham House rules. Some of you are familiar with that, but essentially what it means is we need to have a comfortable and safe space for all the participants to share their personal stories, professional stories relevant to the content. And so you are free to use this information outside, but you cannot identify any participants, facilitators, or their affiliations outside of this call. And this is to make sure everyone is comfortable enough to be able to share their stories, because this is what will enrich the learning. Do feel free to put up your hand at any time, and we'll call on you, because this is an interactive course and we'll get more out of it as we're addressing the questions and going along the way. So I'm going to share my screen with a brief Mentimeter. I'll type out the code for you while I share the screen as well, so that you can join the Mentimeter. And this will be the same one that will be playing throughout. So the code is 23852017. So if you can kindly go to menti.com and put in that code, you can join the session. So don't worry, everything is totally anonymous. Your name is not going to pop up with the answers. So go ahead and answer the questions. So the first question, it's 10 a.m. Some of you have been through traffic already. Today I was lucky I got to work from home because we have this course coming up. So how are you feeling right now? Just type a word, that's fine. So grateful, ready, unstable. Ouch. I hope it's not your internet that's making you unstable. And hopefully by the time we go through the content, you'd calm down. The beginning part is quite relaxing. I only have 5 responses and we're about 28 on the call. So I'm expecting to see at least 15, 20, and then I'll move on. Sweaty. Oh, sorry. This heat in Ghana right now is a disaster. I can't wait for the rainy season, although it has its own issues. Ready. Yes, me too. I have my coffee and my water here. Moody. Yeah, it's the end of the week. Tomorrow is a holiday, so hopefully that works. Excited with a double, or actually it's 6 Ds. Okay, well, great. Overwhelmed. Okay, just take a deep breath. Moving on to the next question. Just take a look at the participant list. How many people do you know on this call? There are 28 of us now. How many do you know? And then pick. Okay. We have 9 responses. And kindly keep your mic on mute. Okay, so we have about 14 responses now. And so the bulk of the people on this call know 1 to 5 people. And then we have a couple of outliers in either direction. Okay, that's good. You expected about this. So hopefully at the end of this course, you'd have interacted enough so that you widen your network. Last question. So you were given the topics we're going to cover today on networking, data management, negotiation, and then ops and finance models. Which topic is of most interest to you? Okay, so we do have a lot of people who are interested in the modeling part. And then the sort of outliers are around impact investing, networking. So this course is not going to go into depth with finance modeling and valuation. There's going to be another course that will do that. But we have left a lot of room towards the end for you to ask questions based on my background, and then I can address those. So those of you that are expressly looking to go into a deeper dive with that will come. And hopefully for the rest of you, we'll be able to address the remainder of your topics of interest. So I hope you are alert now. I'm going to share the PowerPoint presentation and then we'll dive in. Mary, I'm going to focus on the presentation, so I won't keep an eye out on the waiting room. If you can keep adding people as they join.
We'll do that. Yeah.
Thank you. So the first section we're going to cover is on building robust networks. How do we build robust networks, and why do we even have to go there and build networks? Just taking a step back, networks are really about connecting the dots, and for a lot of us, our networks tend to be very small. So, you know, there are 3 circles at the bottom left hand side of your screen, and that's how most of our networks look like. It's sort of an overlap between work, school, and then other interests that we have. But what we really need is first for our networks to be a lot looser, more the second diagram with the 3 circles, where they are not overlapping as much, because when that happens, then we have more room to be able to really get a lot more and give a lot more into our networks. And ideally, we should be having our networks looking like webs, because then the connections are across multiple dimensions. And so people, you know, ask, why should I invest and expand my network? The first reason is not what a lot of people naturally go towards. Most people will think about the second reason, but the first reason is networks actually really, really help you to increase your expertise and your knowledge. And they share information with you, which makes you more open-minded, and puts you on a different platform in terms of your career, and in terms of just your interest as well. Because again, your networks will cover both your professional, your personal interest as well. Now, a lot of people, when you ask them about why they should be networking, they think about number 2, which is new opportunities, jobs, partnerships, collaborations, PR. Yes, that is all fine and good. My current job with Njaro is not because I applied for a job, it's because of my network. I went to school with the 2 co-founders, and we had a lot of shared experiences and shared interests during our time in school. They were a year ahead of me in business school. So when I was looking to come back to Ghana, I reached out to them, found out about what they're doing, and I came to hang out with them 12 years later. I'm still hanging out with them. So yes, networks are very, very critical when it comes to getting new leads. And even for Njaro itself, the company started because of opportunity in a network. It was a LinkedIn post sent to the founder that he responded to. It was a family office looking to start a fund focused in West Africa. And this was on LinkedIn, and he responded to it. And this was in 2009. 14 years later, we're still chugging. So it's quite fruitful in terms of what you can get out of your network when you do invest into it. Now, the third part is not about what you get out of it. It's about what you can give. So when you do build your network, you can really help other people. A lot of people, again, think about quid pro quo with network. What are you giving me? What are you giving me? What are you asking of me? But it's not about that. You sometimes have to just give. Don't expect anything in return. And your take will come from other sources. It's not necessarily going to come from, you know, the exact lines you are given into. And so if you look at it, some of us have mentors, some of us have mentees, and sometimes we do things for our mentees, especially that you're not expecting anything back. This year, I've been involved with business school applications, and just like applying to any grad school, it's intense not just on the applicants, it's also intense on the people who have to do the reference letters as well. And so I found myself spending quite a bit of time doing the reference letters, and I had to do them well because my mentee was applying to Ivy League institutions. I've attended one. I understand how important it is to make sure the application is well-rounded. So it wasn't a matter of me sitting behind my computer typing up, what I think should go into the reference letter. I spent time to read his entire application, all his essays, understand what strengths he was highlighting, what development areas he was highlighting, and to round everything off in his application with my reference letter. That way, then he has an entire package going in and not a lopsided package. It was a lot of work, but for me, it's a very rewarding experience because I'm waiting for decision day, which is going to be 6th of December, 14th of December, and 7th of December for his schools, because when he gets in, I'm going to be so excited and I'm going to get all these endorphins in my brain, and I'll be very happy, not because I'm going to school again, but for him, genuinely for him. And this links to the fourth point, that people who are connected with other people live longer and healthier. And there's extensive research you can Google after the course that has actually documented this. And it's not just about the hello, hi. It's about having meaningful connections with other people, because you begin to share in their joy, you begin to share in their anxieties, their pain. And in a way, it makes you not focus on yourself all the time. And it just makes you a more resilient person. And so this, again, is documented. I don't know about you, but I definitely want to live healthier. I don't know about longer either, but if having meaningful connections is what will help me get there, I'm definitely going to invest in that area. So moving on, I just checked and there were no hands up. So why do a lot of people actually dread networking? So there are lots of excuses that come up, and I don't like thinking of them in terms of excuses. I just think of them as obstacles or roadblocks because they are genuine, and all of us have had those roadblocks at some point or the other. So the first one is, oh, I'm not a social butterfly. But how many of us really are? For the past few years, take the Brealey-Myers, Myers-Briggs, test now and then to see, whether my personality has evolved. I'm highly introverted, and people don't believe it. Yes, I love dancing, but that's separate. It's me having fun, but to be in front of people, to speak, no. To go into a conference, talk to people, no. It's not the thing which gives me joy when I wake up in the morning. No, I want to stay in my lane, doing my work and reading and things like that. So knowing that about myself doesn't mean I shouldn't still network and get the benefits out of networking. It just means I should put in place specific strategies to enable me network effectively. Another roadblock we hear about is, I don't have time. Who does? Really? Nobody has time these days between all the things you have to do at home with your families, and then your friends, and then work, then other interests outside of work. There's really no time. So you have to make time, because if you don't make time, then you're not going to get the benefits. Counter to that, some people will say, oh, other people who like my work will talk about me, but they don't have time. So if you're not making time to do the networking, trust me, you're not going to be top of mind for them either. We also hear a lot, oh, it's so expensive. You have to go out, you have to pay for things. All these conferences, they are expensive. Yes, they are, but that's not the only strategy you can put in place. And we'll talk about alternate models shortly. So yes, it's expensive if you're doing certain types, but once you implement others, then you'll find out you can get the networking benefits. Then people also say a lot, oh, I can't use and manipulate people. Yes, that's if you go in with the intention that it's all quid pro quo. It's not. It's about your generosity and reciprocity. And if your focus is on giving, then you're not going to have this as a road block. Then people also say, oh, well, when I do go out, there's nothing interesting to say. Everybody knows everything. There's so much social media interaction now. And I really don't have anything to say. Yes, you do. You're unique in your own experiences. And people, we have some feedback. I think the connection is back properly now. So you're unique in your experiences, and that is worth sharing, because you are quite different from everyone else, and we need to hear about you and learn from you. So the last one is that online trolls can write unkind comments, and this is mostly if you're doing networking online. Look, humanity for the most part it's good people. Yes, there are vile people out there and evil people, if you could even use that word, but the vast majority of people are not going to do that. I think I remember when check-in started, and you could have GPS on your phone and you check into a location with Foursquare and other apps, and there was a whole rage online about, listen, if you're checking into places, thieves are going to know you're not at home, and they're going to go home and raid your house. How many of these stories have you heard? Yes, it did happen, but it was, under 0.1%, which tells you that the vast majority of people online are good people. Yes, you have crazies and trolls online, but that shouldn't stop you from going on. So when you do think about it, all the 36 of us on the call now have friends. If you have friends, at least one friend, then you already know how to network. Because if you think about it, how did you become friends, right? How did you get to the point where you're comfortable to share your stories, hang out, shoot the breeze? The same skills you used to establish that friendship or friendships you have are the same skills that you need for networking. So if you think about it that way, it's actually not a big jump, and then you can do it. Secondly, you really need to build your network before you need it. So if you're hungry right now because you haven't had breakfast, or you're intermittent fasting, or for whatever reason, you don't go and get a seed of corn and plant it and expect it to germinate fruit for you to harvest. Then either boil it and eat it, or process it into whatever form you like. It's impossible. So if we don't do that when it comes to hunger, right? We plan for when we are hungry, or when we're hungry, then we can go and buy food, but we plan for it. Why do we do the same thing with people? And people are even more fickle than plants, right? So you have to do the same thing to people. You have to plant, which is establish that connection. You have to nurture that relationship. And then at some point, you may or may not need to harvest. So it's a very long-term investment. And if you're not putting in the work right now, do not expect it to be available for you when you do need it. And frankly, your work itself, because people always say that, oh, your work will speak for itself and everybody will know. No, it doesn't work like that. It will only get you so far, right? It's important to establish your credibility that you have, that core skill, but to have more doors open for you and more opportunities, you have to do other things and not just your work itself. And when you do think about it, reciprocity and knowledge, they're not bank accounts, so that it's full of knowledge, and it's full of favors you can call on, and then each time you withdraw, the balance goes down. That's not how it works. I remember when I had my second child some years ago, and one of my best friends who had one child and she was pregnant with her second one called me and asked me, so what happens? Do you feel you've had to sort of share the love between your first child and your second child? So you had one child before, you had maybe 10x love for that child. Now you have two children. Are you doing 5x? And we had a good laugh, and then we thought about it, and I said, actually, no, something happened in that whole process that actually made the love I have for the children not 10x, but about 30x. And so now the first child has 15, second 15. It means the pie got bigger. And it's the same thing that happens with your network. You never deplete. So long as you're doing the investing in your network, the pie gets bigger. So there are many people you've probably helped in all kinds of ways. You've probably forgotten and have completely lost count. But at some point, you will realize that just that investing has made your existence and your professional life a lot more fulfilling. And as I mentioned earlier, there are multiple channels for networking, and you use as many natural moments that are available to you. And we'll talk about some of these shortly. And then you'll realize that so long as you're being intentional, then you're going to be able to expand your network. So now, after we've talked about why it's important to have the networks and how you don't listen to the roadblocks that the voices in your head are telling you, how do you actually go in and start building the network? So there are 5 that I've mentioned over here. So attending conferences, in-person events is one. And here you have local conferences you can attend. You don't have to invest thousands of dollars and go abroad. You also have virtual conferences, and these can be local or international, which when they are set up right, gives you access to networking platforms or apps that you can use. And these are all creating natural moments where you can meet and connect with people. We're getting to the end of the year. There are going to be tons of end of year parties, and you could also use that as natural moments to connect with other people. There's also one-on-ones. And again, given that I tend to be ISTJ on the spectrum, which means I'm more introverted, this is my happy place where I have a coffee chat with someone for 30 minutes. I'm very happy. I'm not nervous at all. I am happy to set it up. And so I tend to prefer personally, because again of my personality type, one-on-ones than going to conferences and big events. I still go to them because it's good for me, but it's not my preferred sort of pathway. So the second one is, one of the cheapest ways, in my opinion, which is the focused professional online activity. And here, the key element to remember is you have to be intentional. It's just so surprising for me how many people are just interested in spray and pray that something is going to stick. So scroll, and that's it. A lot of people are just scrolling, consuming content, scroll and like. But here we want to be intentional. We're building a network. We want to identify people we can help along the way, and maybe people that we can collaborate with, which means then you have to start doing things which are not spray and pray. So it's much harder to pause, read someone's content, and make a relevant comment than to just scroll past or just like and move on. And once you start generating comments, you realize that other people, if you do put out content, will also start reading your comments as well. And then it becomes interactive. It becomes natural moment. You're engaged. Then it's easier to go out of the online world into the real world to do work. Reposting is another mechanism, or setting up virtual chats now on Zoom or Google Meet or whatever other apps you like. So, depending on sort of what your focus is, at least in our line of work, in finance and you helping SMEs, the bulk of that kind of interaction right now is happening on Instagram, on LinkedIn versus Instagram and TikTok. So there's a lot of research that happens on Instagram, on TikTok, and Facebook, other apps. But for the professional networking, at least in our circles in Ghana here, most of it is happening on LinkedIn. And we'll do a poll for everyone to sort of tell us what they're seeing elsewhere. So the next sort of module you could look at in terms of where you can build your networks are your industry organizations. Now, some of you focus on specific sectors, whether it's oil and gas, or it's the finance, PE banks, or SMEs, and there are multiple organizations from Impact Invest in Ghana, AGI, various associations that they organize their own conferences, they organize their own in-house events, and these are great places, again, to have more targeted networks forming around those areas. So the next module is on education. So with education, it's definitely a natural, one of the most natural environments to be able to create your networks. So from primary school through your secondary, tertiary, professional, education, like this course that we're on today, these are natural moments. You're going to spend time. Today, we're built to spend 2 to 3 hours on this call. So whether you like it or not, we're going to be here for 2 to 3 hours. So by the end, of that time, because you would have been in conversations with other people, you'll most probably leave here with at least one new person that you're going to stay in touch with. So they are just natural moments that we need to take advantage of. I remember when I was in the States and I had to go into Canada to change my visa. And I had one of my primary school friends, and we've just been in touch loosely. So I looked him up and said, hey, Derek, I'm coming over to Canada. Can you tell me a hotel which is sort of close to where you live? And then he says, oh, no, you don't do that. I live with my uncle. You can come and stay with me, right? And this kind of story has happened to me over and over again. Either myself providing housing for somebody who's coming to the city I happen to be living in at that point in time, or vice versa. Here, because I've been in Ghana for a while, I have classmates who are still living abroad and they have all their older parents here. And I know, how it is with my parents now, they're in their 70s now, and I have to check up on them. So then I started checking up on the parents of some of my friends who don't live here. And that has created, all these amazing stories for me in terms of learning more about them, learning more to be circumspect in my life, and other connections I've made just because I check up on my friends' parents who are living here and their children are abroad. So the fifth area that I also highlighted was mentorship. And I already told you the story about my mentee that I worked on their applications, and on the mentors side as well. So it's just important that, you are finding people who are up and coming and you help them. And if you need help from people who have been there, you also reach out to them. Currently, I personally need to find mentors. I've outgrown my mentors. We became friends along the way, and I can't even classify them as mentors right now. They are friends. So I really need to have a structured mentor, and I'm looking for some right now. So it's one of those things that evolve over time, and you just have to be mindful of creating more opportunities to mentor other people, because you do have something to offer. You're not where you are right now because you cruised. You're here because you've done a lot of work, and it means that there are other people who are now coming up that you can definitely help. So the key elements to remember about all these modules that you can use in terms of strategies to expand your network is you really don't have to be 100% on each of them, that you're in conferences all the time, you're online all the time. No, it's impossible. However, it's important to sort of actively and intentionally be active in all of them, because if you are, then it pushes forward. And since COVID, for me, I hadn't gone to any international conference until this year. So I went to the first one in Turkey in June. And this was not one of those massive conferences where you could just sort of disappear and find your feet. It was an intense conference where it was participation, focus groups every day, multiple times, report outs. It's a working conference, not a panel type conference, listening to speakers and panelists. So when I got there and we went to the first one, I literally froze, because I looked around and I said, oh my gosh, I have to be switched on the whole time, because it's you're in a different plane of engagement. And it took me a few hours to get back into the groove about how you have to project and carry yourself and engage with other participants during that kind of a platform. And the key learning is that it's just like a bicycle. You don't look at a bicycle and then you learn how to ride it. You actually practice. And it's the same thing for attending conferences, it's the same thing for mentoring, the same thing for building an online presence. You don't conceptually think about it and it seems nice and it happens. You practice, and the more you do it, the better you get, and it gets easier and easier and easier. So we're gonna switch again to Mentimeter so that we could have some sharing so we can learn from each other. Is there any question before we switch? If not, I'll share my screen and then we'll answer those Menti questions. Again, the code is 23852017 if you have joined after we did the first one. So we'll give everyone a little bit of time to join. So we just talked about conferences. So now we're 42 on the call. Can you name one local conference that you think will be helpful for the other colleagues you have on this call to attend? One local conference. And this is your generosity that you're practicing right now. Impact Summit, yay! So those of you who were fortunate to attend, it was awesome this year. Any local conference that you think anyone on this call will benefit from? DVCA conference. Yes, we had a maiden conference this year. It was fantastic. Andy conference, yes. Especially if you're lucky, it's held in Ghana and you didn't have to travel. That was also phenomenal. I didn't attend that one, but I heard amazing things from there. So far, 3 conferences. You can add that to your to-do list. Look out for them. ESO Forum had side event for TAs, yes. So again, based on how fast we didn't get responses, then it shows this is one of the areas that we would all benefit from thinking about attending conferences. If you just look at the papers, you will see quite a bit being advertised. Most of the time they're free if they have good sponsors, and then you could show up. And if they have fees, you could always ask for a scholarship to cover you if you're unable to pay, or for your company to pay for you. So now we're getting more. People are waking up and getting creative. GIPC has events. Again, GIPC is great because they actually have some SMEs they're trying to showcase, which could be potential clients for you as well. Crystal Ball Africa, and then GRIC Annual Forum. So thank you everyone that posted. We'll move on to the next question. Name one international conference that you think your colleagues should attend. It could be something you've gone to yourself, or you've heard about it and it seems amazing and you think others should also consider if they have the resources to attend. We have one so far, the West Africa Deal Summit, which was very good in terms of meeting potential new clients and learning about various sources of funding which are available in the sub-region. Any more coming up? And this is good. This tells us as a group, we're not looking externally too much. And right now, we literally are in a world where opportunities, even for those that the operations are in Ghana and we want to focus in Ghana, may not necessarily come up because you're in Ghana. It might come up because you connect with other people abroad. There are virtual platforms, there physical ones, and it's good if you start thinking about how you could attend some of these to be able to expand your network. So currently we have the Africa Free Trade conference. Then there was an employee assistance program in Africa. Then AFSIC has the Investing in Africa. And if for those who are primarily focused on finding venture or PE partners, we have the Super Return Conference, we have the annual AFCA conference as well. Then we have the Angel Investment one. This year's is in Cape Town, so that's going on right now. So these are places where you meet the money bags. And then you could also meet potential clients. COP28 coming up in Dubai, the GSG Summit. So thanks to everyone who has posted. So we'll just move on along to wrap up this section. So there was actually one more question, which is about the platforms, and we just talked about it, and I almost missed that because this will be useful for everyone else. Which online platform do you find the most useful for building your professional network? I talked about LinkedIn, but really, really curious to find out for everyone on the call, which platform are you finding the most useful? LinkedIn. Okay. So we actually have Facebook coming online. While we're waiting for other responses, there are 40 something of us on the call, and we have 6 generous people. It will be helpful to hear from the rest of you. Which platform are you finding useful? Even if it's LinkedIn, type it into the Menti poll because it reinforces that for other people as well. The main point is that it's important to sort of be mindful of your privacy and maintain sort of a personal online presence, which does not interfere with your professional online presence. And we've all heard of horror stories of people who have been terminated from their jobs because of things they did online in their personal time or their personal moments. So just have to be mindful about that. So now we have 15 people who shared that LinkedIn is sort of the primary when it comes to the professional networks, and X is showing up a little bit, and then Facebook is number 2. So thanks to all of you that participated in the Menti poll. So just to wrap up sort of the key tactics, I will say, if you're using any of these strategies of going to conferences or online, the first one is sort of mind your choice of words. If I started the course and I said, "Good morning, everyone, I've put together a course for you." Okay, that's good. That works. I didn't say anything bad. But if I said, Good morning, everyone. I read your feedback. I've discussed with the IIGH team. I have researched and tailored a course for you. Which one are you going to listen to me more? And in both of them, I didn't change my activity. It's the same level of effort I put in. But in the first one, I said it's one way. The second one, I said it's a second way. And when you're networking, you need to be on. And it means you have to be mindful of the words you're using. So that doesn't mean you can't be authentic, right? Because you always have to be authentic. You're not trying to become somebody else. It's the same person, same level of effort, but you're just choosing your words more carefully, and you're choosing them more carefully so that you can be more engaging. The next element you could think about is listening attentively. And we all know how it feels like when we're talking to someone and the person is just looking around all over the place, rolling their eyes, and you just get deflated and you want to stop talking to the person. So in the same way, when you're in person especially, and you're talking with people, you need to listen. And there are ways you listen. You don't have to stare the person down, but you can nod, you could look away, but you need to be present. And once you're present, then it's easier to have a more meaningful conversation. Then my favorite is be charming and smile. So my family from where I was growing up, I think they would have called me Wednesday because I hardly smiled, and now I smile all the time. And it's when you're even online and you're talking with people, and our video is not on right now because we're saving bandwidth for participants, but when people are smiling, you can tell from the inflection in their voices. And in person, it's even easier to see that they're smiling and they're engaged and they want to have that conversation with you. And again, these are tactics that are easier for you to do. Yes, I'm not a Wednesday anymore. I smile a lot because I have learned it's actually much, much better for me if I smile a lot for my interactions with other people and also for my own sort of self. I think there's a lot of studies again that document and show that your mood changes based on your actions and the words you use. So you have to actually be mindful of those things for your own person before you even talk about other people. Next, you need to be bold and initiate. The half of people who are around you are all sort of also minding their business. So if you don't step out and make the effort, how are you going to get an interaction going? And for the vast majority of people, when you are the first person to sort of reach out, they will hold you and then they will bring you into their circle for the vast majority. So just make the efforts, be bold, initiate. Before events, there are lots of other things you need to prepare. So this is your personal grooming, your attire, your etiquette, your attitude. There are lots of courses in person and online about etiquette that you can go to and get, all nice and cleaned up. I was very fortunate growing up. I was a girl guide, and we did a ton of etiquette and personal grooming. And so that has been helpful. Another one is attitude. It doesn't matter sort of, how you feel. At the beginning of this course, we had some participants who were anxious, who were moody, who were not, I would say, in a best place to start a course. However, I'm hoping once they're here, they're switching and being more open. And it's the same thing in person. When you get into a setting that you have designated as, hey, I'm going to network, I'm going to meet new people, learn about them and see what we can do together or how I can help them, you have to switch. and you have to check your attitude outside. You can pick it right up when you're leaving if you want to wallow in that same mind space, but you just have to make the mental switches when you're entering those spaces to cue you that, listen, I'm in a different space. I need to behave differently, and I need to be more present. It's easy if in our professions we wore uniforms, because if we had, like nurse's uniform or a security person's uniform, once you put it on, you just get straight laced. I used to be in the Air Force Cadets Corps when we're in school. And no matter how silly you are as a person, as soon as you put your uniform on, your demeanor changes because now you are in uniform. So for those of us that were in professional services, we don't wear, those obvious uniforms. You can create your own uniforms, whether it's a badge, a pen, your notebook. Designate something that once you pick that thing up, you put on your uniform. You need to switch, check your attitude and your issues so that you can focus and, be as professional and engaging as you can in your work. And that brings me to the last point under the networking tips. You need to continuously learn and unlearn. There are lots of things, I grew up on, which over time I've had to dump them along the way and unlearn, and then learn new things. And the new things come because they are more relevant to the work I do now, and they're more relevant to the space I find myself in. So case in point, as a professional, that's my initial professional experience was in the States, and we're very much Americans in the professional setting, especially management consulting, you are extra switched on all the time. And then I moved to the Middle East as a female of African origin. And so in terms of, status, there are a couple of X's against my name. And for a while, I was working out of Cairo, and I was working with the Ministry of Interior for a transportation project. And my counterparts are high-ranking police officials in the Ministry of Interior. Here I am, this happy-go-lucky Ghanaian girl, and they don't know what to do with me. And I quickly discover how best to engage with them without offending religious sensibilities, because we have certain sort of protocols we have to follow within Cairo, within Egypt in general. It's a primarily Islamic country. So there are certain things I had to be mindful of in terms of how I dress, how I address people. So there was that. And then there's also just in terms of culturally, the dynamics between males and females. And I got promoted in that specific role from an associate to a manager role because I was able to adapt to still work effectively in that environment. But I still had to unlearn a lot of things which I had picked up from my experience in the US and learn new ways of working. So there are a couple of resources I've mapped out for you. The first one is a short video. It's a TED Talk, so it's not very long, about 15 minutes. It's fantastic. So if you're having any hesitation about, why you should be lining up dots and connecting those dots in terms of people, watch that. It will just unlock a lot for you. The second one's an article, again, which sort of goes a bit deeper into, if you think about networking in a slightly different way, how that's going to help your approach into networking. Of the books I've lined up, my favorite is Never Eat Alone. I met Keith some years ago in the States. He visited Wharton where I was at school, and I identified with a lot of how he is. His background was very poor, and he just navigated and has moved into a whole different space right now because he quickly understood the value of being a generous networker. So that's my favorite book. The others, two books that I read because I had to again unlearn how I grew up here in Ghana. In Ghana, at least for me, and the spaces I grew up in, you don't talk about yourself in certain ways. And so again, given the space I was in, the states and the settings I found myself, I had to unlearn all of that and pick up different ways of being able to be effective in those spaces. And then the last one is by Susan Rohn. It's How to Work a Room. So it's also just more tactics if you need more ideas. But yeah, with these, if you go through, you'll be well on your way if you aren't already to network effectively. So I'll pause for any questions. And you're gonna get the slides after the call, so you'll have access to all of those links as well. Any questions, comments, stories you want to share? Remember Chatham House rules, so this is a safe space for you to share your questions, and everybody has promised they are not going to identify you and your affiliations outside the call. Well, if there's no hand going up, we'll just move on to the next module. So the next module is on data management. And we all have all kinds of data that we're housing. And if you're like me and you've lost data, either your phone or your computer crashed or it was stolen, and gone through that painful experience of not backing up your WhatsApp, and then you change devices and you've lost a ton of data, then yes, you need to pay attention to data management. So if you think about the kind of information that we have some of your advisory business data, since we have some SME advisors, and then we have some lawyers, we have different kinds of transaction advisors on this call. So you have all that data on your registration, your policies, your staff. Essentially, you're a small business yourself, whether you have just yourself on payroll or a team, you're a small business. So all your internal data you have. Then we just talked about networking. You have your professional network data, their contact informations, their preferences, who eats sushi, who hates alcohol, who loves to golf, all those things, and any key points from meeting notes that you've had with them that you want to keep track of. You need to maintain that data somehow. Then you have your client and sector data. So all the transaction documents, and we'll go over some a bit, that you have from all the mandates that you have signed up for. You need to have a platform or various platforms on which you're going to maintain this data. And why? It's because, yeah, you don't want to lose the data and you want to be able to store and retrieve it easily. And then you also want to be able to just manage tons of information, because especially right now, we're getting information coming to us left, right, and center. You need to be able to just process it and store it so that when you actually need it, you're able to retrieve it quickly and then make decisions using that information. My best part is that if you have a good database, it's easier for you to improve the relationship you have with other people you're working with, whether they're staff or their clients, investors, regulators, those of you who are registered with SEC or any other organizations, you have noticed now the burden of data that we are required to produce now more so than ever before. So if you do have a good way of managing the data, then you're going to be miles ahead in terms of being able to use it. So what are the key considerations when you're going to pick out what platforms you're going to use? The first one, and for me, the most important one, is security. And that's because we all know of WikiLeaks. We know of what happens when information goes to places they are not supposed to go to. We've heard about a lot of SMEs, for instance, who complain a lot about how they have shared information about their business with people, and next thing they know, a similar business has been set up. They have more funding, they kill it, and then they, are at the sort of losing end of the whole equation. So it's really important that security measures are put in place in terms of who has viewing rights, who has downloading rights. Some apps you could also even limit if they can take screenshots. They can use their phone, but that actually makes it a lot harder for some people to rip data. Who can share this information? Who can edit? Are you conducting basic due diligence on the people you're given access to? Have they signed a non-disclosure agreement that you can go after them if you can really prove that they misuse the data that you have given them access to? So that's the main consideration. There are other considerations. One is cost, especially in our environments where you don't want to spend too much money when you don't have to. So some of these platforms are free. Some of them you pay per user. Some of them you pay flat monthly or annual fees. Another one is ease of access. So some of them, because of their security, you have to have a VPN before you access it. Others are just easy. You have an online access and you can go into it. You don't even need to create accounts so long as you have a link. And so there are various levels of access that you have to think about. Now, storage limits are critical. I remember the first time I got notification from Google that I'd run out of space, and I was surprised. I don't know how I ate up 20 GB in my drive already. But yeah, very quickly, I've had to top up on that. And that's because it's just the volume of information that I'm keeping. It's quite a bit. And so you have to be mindful of the storage limits on any platform that you keep to make sure that it's as much as you need to have now and for you to grow into. And the last one is the legals and confidentiality. Again, to make sure that the people you do give access to, you have ways of reaching back out to them if they have misused the information. So I've just highlighted a few of the platforms. Most of you are on Drive or Dropbox. There's DocSend, OneDrive, iCloud. Journey is a pretty awesome one. And especially if you're pitching an SME, you can create a story, you can put videos. The presentations are a lot friendlier. And so going through sort of the whole data room is a lot easier in Journey than when it's just in an indexed way. There's also Ignite. So we'll have a question later on for you to think up any other platforms that you think your colleagues on the call should also be aware of so that they can use that in their work. So here I've highlighted some best-in-class principles when it comes to the storage of the data itself. The first one is an index table of contents. And I find when I get access to a lot of data rooms here in Ghana that they are not indexed. By not indexed, the picture on your right-hand side gives you an idea of an index. So the index has all the folders and the subfolders, and they have names. There's also a TOC that is going to have a list of everything that has been included, so that if you need information, you don't go into the data room, you go into the index, and then you look at it, you search it, and then you find what you want, and then you go into the data room for it. Half the time, at least from a lot of data rooms we've had access to locally, it's a dump. It's one big folder, or maybe there's been some attempt at sorting things out, and then maybe, you know, the top level folders, 10 folders or something. But once you go into the folder, it's wild, wild west. It's just a bunch of document names. Sometimes the names are not intuitive, so you have to go into them before you will find out what it is. And even after you've gone through the whole database, later on when you're trying to just go and recheck something, it's just hard to. So I would really encourage all of you to index the pages and have the TOC, have the description of the documents in there, or have very intuitive names of the documents to make it much, much easier for the users to access. Now, it's also important to have a dated or digital audit trail within the database you're using, especially if you're dealing with potential investors. And this will help you avoid legal issues. So this year, we're in a transaction with international investors. We had a data room for the targets, a lot of information in there, indexed, and everything. So at the time, we had received the offers, negotiated the offers, and essentially going into, I would say, the final negotiations before closing. Some material information came up at the investors' end, and they were surprised we hadn't disclosed that information to them. And we were surprised that they didn't know that information, because that information had been available. So they contested because they wanted to change a lot of terms of the offer, which had been negotiated and agreed. And that was just going to set us back. And we were operating on a very tight timeline. So we said, listen, this information, we definitely put it out there. It was your job to review the information. We've given it to you. And they said, no, you didn't. So all we did was go into the data room, find the document. There's a timestamp on when the document was uploaded. There is actually detail on who in our team uploaded the information. So once that evidence was there, that whole thing of, oh, we need to start renegotiating everything went away, because we did not hide the information. We put everything out there, and we were addressing questions that they specifically brought up. And that really helped us to avoid, number one, a waste of time by going back to renegotiate, and number two, the threat of the legal action that their lawyers were thinking of bringing to us because we had disclosed material information. So this dates and digital audit trail of who put the information there, what time, it's quite important. Some apps naturally have that, so you don't have to think about it. But if you're involved in a transaction and there's money going to change hands, this is one element you can't snooze on at all. So, you know, there are lots of intuitive categories that you already have, and that's what your index table of contents is going to have. You're going to have your legal section, commercials, financials, human resources, and you know, they're very intuitive. It's how the businesses are structured. So that's how you also put the information in there as well. And the key point is index it, have the table, the index table, have the stamps as well as who is loading and uploading. So you can do all of this and still have potential data loss. Earlier this year, we had an incident with one of our companies. So about 2 years ago, we had been introduced to a strategic buyer by Exim Bank. So that's very credible to get someone introduced to you by Exim Bank. And so as you know, the clients that we have is a small business, very excited to be connected with this international buyer and formed a relationship with the person. The person has a registered entity in the UK and the Emirates. For the UK, you could actually look up companies registered there. There's a database. Their RGD is more open than ours, so you could go and search online without talking to anyone. So we did that background work. Yes, their entity was registered. We even went to look at some of the filings, limited filings they had put up. So it was a credible relationship. We even went on to introduce that individual to a supplier of ours because they wanted specific products and we didn't have it. So this relationship went on for 2 years. And then we're in a situation where the SME was looking for an investor, and as a credible customer of that business, we let him know that, hey, this company needs investment. Are you interested? And he said yes. So as a result, now we're signing an NDA. He's getting access to data. He's asking a ton of questions. The way we grant access is sort of on a need to know basis. So depending on where you are in the investment process, you get a certain tranche of information. Once we finish that particular level, you get to a more advanced level where things are looking like the deal is going to go through, you get another round of information. So this individual started asking for very, very specific information about the products, which we said, no, that kind of information is only given to people who have actually invested already. And even that, they don't get the entire details. They get certain things coded. And this is not financial information. That's very easy to provide. But this is about sort of the nitty-gritty of the company, the formulae of the products that they're putting out. So after all this, over sort of a 2.5-year process, what we discovered on the back end was the individual was just interested in amassing information to set up his own business. And so what he was doing was getting information by being part of this process with this SME, and then also information from other people in the ecosystem. And he was just piecing the information together to set up his own business. And once, you know, he had information from all of his due diligence, then he stopped engaging with everyone. So this is just to say that you need to be very careful out there. This kind of situation doesn't happen all the time, but it does happen. And you could have signed your NDA, you could have done everything else, but it could still happen. So what you need to do is constantly be on the alert, give information on a need to know basis. So you're not putting out information that can be used against your SME. So we're gonna have 2 Mentimeter questions about the tools you're using, and then we could wrap up this section as well. So again, the code is 23852017. If you've recently joined, I've noticed our numbers are up to 45. So the first one is, what cloud storage do you find the most cost-effective and secure for your clients? We've talked about Drive, DocSend, Dropbox. Which ones are you finding most effective that you think others should also look at? So Drive, so Box Drive is showing up. So Google Drive is still the biggest. 6 responses. Other participants, we're waiting for your responses. We should get at least 15 that we know your alerts. You haven't logged in and run away. So OneDrive has shown up, Google Drive, there's Ignite. Once you get big enough to be able to pay their annual subscription, type it in the box. Okay, so we have Drive ranking as the biggest, and then a few other ones, OneDrive, Box Drive. We don't seem to have a lot of Apple users, otherwise would have seen the iCloud up as well. Great. And SharePoint as well. So if you do track data on your professional network, so what are you using? If you use it, if you don't, just say nothing.
There's the impression that
If you're using your phone, you can put other. And this is specifically on your professional network. So not just their name and number and email address, but notes that you're keeping on them to help you when you do engage with them. If you're keeping, if you're not keeping, just say nothing. Or if you're like me and you have amazing memory like an elephant and you keep it all in your head, you can still say nothing. Great. So a lot of people aren't keeping, and some do keep it in Excel, and some are using other mechanisms, phones, other things. So the key points from this is it's important to be mindful that this is an area where you can create very useful information. Then I'll be back on.
Hello, everyone. So we have 5 minutes break. Go and grab some water. Maybe you want to stretch, and then we'll be back with negotiations. We'll also go into our breakout rooms to discuss the case study that was shared in the email. So we have 5 minutes break just to stretch, grab a bottle of water, and then we'll come back with the negotiation and into our breakout rooms. So we have 5 minutes break.
Will find it useful. Um, boundaries that will guide our negotiations to make it better. So it's not to say that you don't know how to negotiate. At this point, for this long, on planet Earth, you most probably have negotiated with a family member or an employer or in the market, just to enhance. So basically, negotiation is when you're having a discussion and it's two parties and you want to get to a point where you are finding an agreeable point. And for transaction advisors, you could be negotiating about the scope of the work you're going to do for a client. You would negotiate on the fees, whether you're having a fixed fee or you're having a retainer, as well as a success fee component. You could also negotiate on the deliverables you're going to give to the client. You could also negotiate with other service providers on behalf of the clients, and this could be lawyers, auditors, market research as well. And then when it comes to investors, also will around term sheets, and we'll go into this a little bit with a case study. And then the legals, specific clauses come up during the transaction closing points with the legal agreements that you would also have to negotiate on. So then what does each person in a negotiation come to the table with? They come to the table with very specific interests. And interests are sort of what is driving them in the negotiation that they are having with you. And it could be a control interest, or it's specific concerns that they have also said that they would like to keep on the table. It could just be lifestyle goals that they have. So the interest really determines the position that any person in the negotiation is going to take. And then you also have the position, which is the stance the person takes. And this is being driven by their interest. So in a lot of negotiations, you find out that people keep going on and on about a point, and they forget that that point they are trying to negotiate is not what is driving the person who has taken that position. And because they haven't addressed the underlying interest the person has, then the person doesn't change their position. But inherently, all positions are negotiable, but the interests are not. So it's very important to get to the interest, because then you can help the person in their brainstorming for alternate positions which could work for them, especially if the current position that they have taken does not work for you. The next element is leverage, and leverage is what you know about the other party or their situation, which could help you to move them towards the position that you would prefer, or to move away from the position that they currently have. So this is going to be what their best alternative is in that particular situation. Leverage the person, the personality or the rank or the title of the person you are negotiating with, and it could also come with time. So a few years ago, there was a hospital that were interested in getting a shareholding into via an investment, and so we met the family that owned the hospital, and the father is still alive, and he was very specific that regardless of what we work out with his children, he always wants the family to remain in charge. He always wants as many people in the family who want, so it's not who are qualified, who want to work in their hospital, to be given a position in the hospital. And these were negotiables for him, because it's not a position, this is his interest. He has created a hospital. He wants it to remain a family business. And given sort of the dynamics with his particular family, for us, this was not going to be very doable, because we are happy for his family to have jobs, which is the position he has taken, that I'm interested in my family remaining in charge, so I want them to have jobs. But for us, having jobs, you can have the jobs if you're qualified, so then that position would not work for us. And we asked him if he was interested in other mechanisms that will ensure that his family remains in charge, and other mechanisms being a different investment structure, so that we wouldn't primarily do equity. We'll do a portion of debt, a portion of equity, so that when it comes to a significant majority, his family will always remain in charge. In terms of decision making, a board is a very strong part of the governance of the business. And so then again, it was a question of, will having fixed board membership to the family. So they had a 5-member board, and it could be written into the company regulations that which are always for the family, which means the family can decide whether they recruit into those seats or it has to be a family member. That's up to them to decide. And when we had this high-level discussion, it was clear that no, the patriarch of the family was very specific in his position. His interest still remained family in charge, but the position he took, which was, my family, if they want to work in this hospital, they should have a job. That he was not going to change that position. And so then we didn't continue the conversation. It was still very early in the conversation. And it's very good to identify these interests up front, because if you can't get the person to change positions because their interests are very ingrained and they don't want to look at alternate positions, then it's just not worth having those conversations. And the table with is about concessions. So these are the various compromises and offerings you can bring to the negotiation. These are the areas where your interests are not so entrenched, so that you can use these as valuable offerings you give to the other person, so that they will also be happy to give up other things that they have, so that at the end of the day, everyone leaves the table satisfied. Because the worst thing that can happen is a resentful end of a negotiation. And then, even the winner is not happy with the outcome of the negotiations. So recently I was negotiating an exit, and one of the clauses the buyer was quite interested in is a non-compete clause, where they didn't want all the parties, so from the founders of the company, the board, anybody going into a similar business. And originally they offered 36 months in their non-compete. And this, they were very it's a position they had taken. The concern that they had, and this is again going into their interest, is that if they don't protect their investment, we could literally use the same information that we had garnered, and this we being everybody who was part of the company's existence until the point of the discussion, to set up a related entity. So what we did once we understood that point was to get him to dampen the non-compete, because for the non-compete, if you really look at it, if somebody has become an expert in a particular area and that's the work they have done, where else should they go and work? It's if they decide to leave the company. And this was particularly important for the managers, that they have a certain expertise and it's quite niche. So if an employment still remains at will, so then it's shareholders and the board, it was straightforward. We would keep the non-compete, but we just got the buyer to dial everything down. Instead of 36 months, it's 12-month non-compete for everyone except the majority shareholders, who have 24-month non-compete. However, what they got back are specific clauses within the confidentiality, and then within clawbacks. So clawbacks are essentially part of the deal they can get returned to them if something goes wrong or a specific situation occurs. So now they have clawbacks, which could help reduce any financial damages they will suffer if one of the people who are key people in the transaction go into the business. So that's essentially are the key elements people come into negotiations with. And if a negotiation, you need to be very, very aware of all these elements and adequately prepare. So there are boundaries within the each negotiation, and if you just sort of
you
think
get
back at a lot of
the strategic plan that was launched a while ago. In the meantime, when you registered, you were given a link.
Thanks, Mary, for putting So the boundaries really help you in terms of, how to structure your negotiations, and especially when higher, it's important to really outline this before you start having those conversations. So as I mentioned before, negotiation is really part of our everyday lives, and it's in the same in our work. It's the same on the international scene between countries as well. So it's quite important that again, to repeat, everyone leaves the table satisfied with the negotiation, because this is important, especially if you mean to maintain long-term relationships with the people that are involved in the negotiation. So the first boundary is the BATNA. So you'll hear a lot of people just talk about BATNA. BATNA is the best alternative to a negotiated agreement. Essentially, it means that if you're going into a negotiation with another party, if your negotiation with that person doesn't work out, yeah, alternative, right? And so you can think about it in terms of their floor, their floor. Then the next one is the walkaway point. So again, before you go in, this is the point which is a no-go for you, right? And that no-go point, it could be dictated for you by your investors. It could be dictated by you by your, your investment philosophy or your work philosophy. It could be determined by your pride, right? Negotiating shareholding is one of the most emotional elements about founding a company. I've had to negotiate shareholding as an entrepreneur. I've had to negotiate it as an angel investor and then within private equity. And in all those spheres, it's a very emotional discussion. It's not just about the DCF or the multiples or whatever valuation method you have used and come up with a valuation. The emotional element is there, and you need to know what that walkaway point is for yourself or your clients before you start the negotiation. Now, in between that walkaway point and the BATNA for a buyer and a seller, there's a zone of potential agreement or the zone of possible agreements, which is that range that could be that happy place you could all land in to be able to make a transaction happen. Yesterday, I had to negotiate with my son because there's a presentation at school, and the school called me about it that he was in the presentation and he decided he's not interested in it anymore. So he doesn't want to perform. And so can I talk to him, because there are only 3 boys in the presentation and about 10 girls. And so if he drops out, the other boys will likely also drop out. So they really need his energy and his presence. So then I talked to him and asked him, so what would it take for him to do the presentation? So this was me trying to understand, what his interests are, because his position, he had told the principal, was he doesn't want to do it anymore. So he lists a ton of different things, and none of them are things that really I could impact, because he was just listing all these very high level, very expensive things that I didn't want to get into. So then I said, okay, there are other concessions I could make, and I'll offer him some to see if he would change his mind. The first concession was he likes candy. So I offered him Kinder Eggs, which are chocolates, and he likes it because they come with little toys. And he said, no, he's not interested because the Kinder Egg toys are small, and after playing with it for a few hours, he'll be bored of them. So not interesting. So that was not a good compromise. He likes devices. So then I offered him additional screen time over the weekend if he joins the presentation again. And that seemed interesting, but it was still not enough. He's like, no, yeah, it's still not enough to get him to do it. It's still a little bit more. Then we'll talk about loss aversion. So loss aversion, again, this is one of those cognitive biases that we have, that when you lose something, you feel it twice as more as you gain something. So as a practical example, if you're in the office and you find 100 cedi notes that nobody claims and it's yours, right? The joy you feel about pocketing that 100 cedis and using it for whatever you want is not sort of commensurate with the pain that you feel if you had 100 cedis in your pocket and you dropped it somewhere and you couldn't feel it. Experiments have shown that you feel the pain at least twice as much as you feel that joy. The amount in question is the same, but you just feel it more. And this is something that works, or it's applicable to most people. And it's something you need to bear in mind when you're going into negotiation. So back to the story with my son. So then I told him he was expecting some Christmas gifts from his grandparents. And I would call his grandparents and tell them that they need to reduce or completely eliminate his Christmas presents because he didn't want to participate in a very important school presentation. So that loss for him was the stick that told him that yes, he will participate in the presentation. He will be very happy about participating. So this was using loss aversion to move him to the finish line, because I made other compromises with the screen time, and that didn't take us to the finish point. Sometimes it's not loss aversion, it's putting in place an alternate which will move someone to the finish line. So I was in a negotiation for a shareholding. The founders, for whatever reason, were stuck on a 1 million valuation. It didn't matter that we did multiples, we did DCF, we did a net asset valuation. They would not move. They said their company is worth $1 million, nothing more, nothing less. Everything about the transaction they were happy with, except that valuation. And this was a deal that we wanted to do because it was a sector we wanted exposure to. And we didn't want to go with other companies because when we had checked, they were even at an earlier stage than this particular company. So we didn't want to fight over the valuation. But in investments, one of the key principles is you pay the right price in the beginning. If you pay too high of a price, it's so hard to make any returns. So then we came up with a different alternative. We said, okay, we'll put a ratchet in the deal. You think your company is valued 1 million. We think it's valued 350,000. And these are the reasons why. We'll give you your 1 million valuation. But over the next 2 years, if revenues don't reach these milestones, the amount of equity we're putting in will not be worth the 10% that we are taking right now. With no additional money, that same consideration is now going to give us 25% of the shareholding. And they were so excited because they said, yes, we will prove to you that at these revenue levels, we can hit those revenue levels, which for us was key to unlocking that 1 million valuation they were talking about. So they signed off to that in a heartbeat. 2 years later, they did not make their revenues. And we were right. Their company was not worth 1 million. So the legals kicked in and we got the ratchet executed. So we ended up with 25%, which was a fair valuation based on all the assessments that we had done. So this was a situation where we're able to get into that transaction because we provided them an alternative. They didn't change their interest. They didn't change their position per se entirely, but we gave them an out where they could prove themselves and hold on to their interest. So Emmanuel says, great trade-off with my son. Yes, with the negotiation. So now let's actually walk through an example to make this a lot more concrete in terms of how the boundaries work. And they have all these fancy names, but that's not what's important. What's important is that you know what your boundaries are. You quickly, with all the discussions you're having with the potential investor or client, figure out what their boundaries are as well, and see what zone of potential agreement or possible agreement you have with them, because it's within this zone that you can actually have the transaction going through. So in the scenario that we have, the Iresi wants to purchase some land in Obosemase. This is around the Ebri area, and she's negotiating with Patrick. Now, Patrick has a parcel of land. He says it's 50,000 cedis. Iresi goes to ask around, and she hears that land in that area for that size of a parcel is about 30,000. So right now, her partner is 30,000. And for her, she's literally anchored sort of her reservation price on that as well. So it's around 30,000. But really, if you look at her pockets and the fact that she wants to start building right away, she'd rather not pay that 30,000 for the land. She'd rather pay 20,000 so that she can use the extra 10K to be able to start the fence wall for the project, and so secure the piece of land, because she doesn't want any issues with land guards. On the other hand, when you look at Patrick's side, he ideally wants to sell it for 50,000. This is his ideal settlement. If he doesn't make the sale to Iresi, there's a big developer who has come to the Obosemase area. They are trying to buy up lots and lots of land to build an estate. And they've advertised this on the radio. They've put up tons of posters, and they are offering 27,000 flat. So when you look at all these parameters for Iresi, who is our buyer, and then for Patrick, who is our seller, they are not overlapping by too much. Iresi's range is between 20 and 30,000. And Patrick's range is between 27 and 50,000. So really, the zone of possible agreements that they can have is only between 27 to 30,000. It's a very, very narrow zone. So if Patrick backs in and says, look, I really don't want to sell to the developer at this 27 rate, I'm just going to hold on. It's not urgent for me. I'm not going to sell this thing. Then his walk away point is not the 27,000 anymore. It's likely something closer to 40 or 45. Then this whole transaction is not going to happen because he has no overlap at all with Iresi. In the same way, if Iresi decides that even this 30 that she's hearing, she can be gangster about it. Right now, the word in town is Sika ini Kurom. So people are going to definitely need money going into 2024. So yeah, she's also not trying to pay this 30 and wants to actually go closer to 25,000 cedis. Then again, this zone won't happen. But if really her boundary is 20 to 30,000 and Patrick's boundary is 27 to 50, they have to keep talking, because nobody talks in terms of what's your walk-away point, what's your partner. No. But when you talk to people and you are trying to formulate this in the back of your mind, very, very quickly, you'll be able to map it out and then move into that zone and potentially have an agreement. I hope that makes sense for you. So now going into sort of how do the conversations happen when you're trying to form these boundaries at the back of your mind to make a potential transaction go through. These are the key principles that you need to have. The first one is really, really explore other people's viewpoints. This is not a battle. And we'll talk about styles in a little bit, but really a negotiation is not a war at all. This is you having something you have for sale, whether it's a service or a company and you're representing an SME or yourself, and you would like to get to an agreement with another party. So you should go into it to want to jointly problem solve with the person. So you need to understand what their concerns are. Ask really open-ended questions to really tease this out. And part of the process is you're going to be building trust, because if you come and you're open and say, okay, what is it that you're looking for? What's your, ideal place? And it's open questions and you're listening, you're taking down notes. Over time, you will hear what they're talking about. And empathy is a significant part, especially again, when you're dealing with entrepreneurs and they have built their business, whether it's still at the angel level or it's become, significant and they're looking for investments. You need to really feel their pain of the journey they've been on, and why they're looking at, whatever part of the transaction they're looking at in that way. Because if you don't have that empathy, it's harder to understand what their interests are and then help them brainstorm with the alternative positions that they can have. And you should prepare, because if you prepare, it's much easier to use the information from your preparation to help people change their positions. So then that means you should have your benchmarks, your reference points. So I'm definitely not going into any negotiation for shareholding without having done some kind of valuation, even if it's high level with multiples or net assets, something. There should be some authoritative benchmarks you have done to be able to help you. Even if you're going to, for me, I go into the marketplaces. I don't go into the marketplace without having an understanding of what various price levels are. So if the trader tells me a price point, I know whether it's too high or not. And if it's an item I don't purchase often enough and I have no idea what the price is, then I'll do a poll. I'll walk around the market, ask prices from a few traders to establish what that common level is in the market before negotiating with anyone that I want. And that means work and preparation. And this is key, because if you don't put in that work, again, it's going to be more difficult to get people to change their positions. And in the process, you really, on top of the empathy, need to validate people's emotions. And separate them from their emotions. It's quite interesting when you're in shareholding discussions. People can become, I would say, very different personalities, and start using very harsh language if they are not hearing what they want to hear. And it's fascinating because it's very stressful situations for them, but you need to validate their emotions and say, I understand where you're coming from. And I understand why you've taken this position. However, based on sort of all this other research, these are different, paths we could go on. These are the pros and cons of each path. What do you think about it? And bring them into the process of that adaptability of brainstorming for the alternate paths. And when you're having these kinds of discussions, you need to be really aware of where they're coming from in terms of their experiences, their body language, their communication style. And then you start mirroring to connect. We have a couple of people in the firm I work with who are competitive negotiators. I'm not. I'm more of a collaborative problem solver type of negotiator. And so when I get into a negotiating with them, no, I don't. I dial back my collaboration and dial up my type A limited genes that I have. So I meet them head on, because with them, I've realized if I'm not as brazen as them, it just makes the conversation not as productive as I would like it to be. And we'll talk about how you can adapt your styles in a little bit. So again, you need to have a lot of open-ended questions and clarify. But most importantly, once you say yes and concede on certain issues, let your word be your word. Keep your integrity and don't move the goalpost around. Always remember, we're in a small ecosystem, and most negotiations are not one time and that's it. There are certain negotiations that are one time. If I drive up and down the motorway a lot, and if someone crosses me on the motorway, it's most likely a one-time negotiation. Very small likelihood I'll meet that particular car again. So I'm not interested in a long-term relationship with that person who cuts me off the road. So I'm not going to invest my energy to have any conversation with the person. I'll probably shake my head, roll my eyes, and move on my merry way. But in our professional setting, it's not one-time interactions like that. They go on for a long time. Potentially, if you're going to even go and have a new client, they'll ask you for references, and then you have to give them the names of that client to go and talk to them about how the relationship went. So because you are really looking forward to maintaining long-term relationships and prioritizing that, then you will have a different lens within which you're having the negotiation. And you need to foster that goodwill. In addition to the loss aversion, you could also think about concessions you've made. Again, there's research showing that say yes to someone 3 times consecutively, and their impression of you is so much better when, especially in negotiation settings. So you should know sort of all the compromises you want to make up front, and very early you start, labeling those concessions so they know that you're giving up those concessions, right? It's not just you're just sliding it in and giving it up, but you've labeled them. They know it's something that was important to you. You've given it up. We have a question in the chat that in negotiations, can the use loss of aversion be termed as blackmail by the other party? If yes, how do we maintain the balance? So I would say it's not blackmail unless you're making the person do something that they would not do with integrity, right? Because typically with blackmail, the sunshine rules apply. If somebody else found out that you gave out your company's information, or you took a cut of a specific deal as a commission that you weren't supposed to, if you got the person to do that thing, and it's typically it's in a gray area, it's not with integrity, because of leverage information you had on them due to their loss their loss aversion, then yes, it would be blackmail. But in the situations that we typically have, it's just making them know that a deal could just hang. You can walk away from a deal. That loss aversion principle still counts. So and people get carried into sunk costs. Again, sunk costs is because of loss aversion. They would say, oh, but I've been on this journey with you for the past 9 months. I've grown to like you. If you tell me this deal can't come on anymore, all this time is wasted. It technically isn't wasted, because now as a company, your data room is better. You could have a better conversation with the next investor that comes along. But you as an investor could say that, yeah, I'm willing to have lost all this 9 months with you if you don't want to modify this particular term. And because of loss aversion, then the person on the other side could change their position. But you're always thinking about the negotiation in terms of compromises. So you're not just using loss aversion to get one thing you want, but you're giving and you're taking. So in the case of the example I gave you with my son, I gave him more screen time, and then I added, the loss of aversion of presence to the equation to get him to the finish line. So, but I wasn't making him, go and sell his soul to the devil or anything ridiculous. It's just a school presentation. So it's not something that, I couldn't get him to the finish line with. Another question has come up. Please, can win-win situation be applied to the context? Emmanuel, could you explain a bit more what you mean by the context? If you're able to speak. Okay. While we're waiting for Emmanuel to clarify, another question from Ernest. Can you ask the other party of their walk-away point, and will they disclose it to you, or you'll have to determine that based on how the negotiation is going? Definitely the latter. Everybody comes to the table with what they want, and they won't tell you. So earlier this week, I had to negotiate with one of our lawyers for a transaction. So they did the transaction, and I had called them in an emergency, and they showed up. They did the work. The work spanned a couple of weeks because I had to let them replace me in the negotiation because it was getting a bit complicated. So when they finished, we clearly didn't talk about how much they were going to charge at the beginning. I needed the deal to go through, and I called them and said, please salvage this transaction for me. And I'm going to be on the back end. So the discussion became three-way between the targets, and the target was only talking to the lawyers, and I was talking to the lawyers. I stopped talking to the targets directly. So everything went well. About a month after I called them, the transaction has been closed. Everyone is happy. And I said, send me your invoice. They send me their invoice. And what they're asking for is not an unreasonable amount. I checked in with a couple of similar transactions, and it was more or less, give or take, about 2% different from the other quotes that I had seen for a similar service. However, because it was an emergency situation, we hadn't planned to spend all that money, right? So then I called them and said, look, you're not, and the negotiation style, again, I used was, I needed to validate their emotions. They had done the work. So I started with, you've done the work, really appreciate it. What you are charging is a fair amount, but the circumstance of this particular transaction, you all know how hostile it was, and it was just extenuating circumstances. That's why you were brought on at the last minute. So please do something for me. So we went back and forth, and then they said, you come up with an amount. And I knew what amount I wanted, but I never tell you that amount. And that amount is essentially my walk-away points. I never, ever tell anyone my walk-away points. So I gave them a lower amount than my walk-away point, and then we negotiated, and we made it just close to my walk-away point, very close to it, right? And this took 2 phone calls and WhatsApp chatting over 3 days to be able to get to this point, because I do have a relationship with them. However, I had to also make a concession. And the concession I made was, I understand you can't get the market value for this piece of work. However, I have other transactions coming up, 12 to be exact. I'm not telling you I'm going to give you those transactions, because that would be quid pro quo, and I don't do that. However, I will give you a chance to bid for all those transactions. And if your quote is comparable to the others that quotes, I know your quality of work, you'll get it. And that was a concession or compromise that I make in that situation. So that's, to sort of iron out the walkaway points and how it really comes out during the negotiation. So I've alluded to the fact that we all have different personalities, and as a result of our experiences and our background, our culture, we have dominant styles. So Richard Shell is going to be one of the books that I recommend to you. He's classified the negotiation styles, and this I find very useful. And there's an accommodating style. You call them relationship managers. So these are the people who are trying to solve, the other person's problem at all costs, maintain the personal relationship. But these are the people that if you don't cut them any slack, then they feel like you've taken advantage of them, and they can be quite irritating to deal with, because then they will keep reminding you of the fact that you didn't cut them slack in a prior negotiation. Then the next one is the avoidance. These are people that will only negotiate if it's really, 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 really important for them to negotiate. They don't like it at all. They will dodge it. They're diplomats. They will use very well chosen words, and you don't get anywhere in the discussion with them. You finish one discussion and you come and sit and you wonder where you ended up, where you progressed. I work with somebody like that, and it's so hard because there'll be a lot of talking, but at the end you don't know where you are. And when you are dealing with people who have that type, you really have to do a lot more work to modify your style and to potentially even get someone else in that discussion to move the negotiation forward. So collaborating is another style. These are the problem solvers. There are people who enjoy negotiating, solving problems, but then they can be too enthusiastic because sometimes they can overcomplicate things in their bid to sort of, oh, how about this side of the equation or that side? They can quickly make things complicated. Personally, I find myself being more dominant. There's a test. You can Google and find a Richard Shell test, which you answer a few questions. It helps you classify which of these styles is your dominant style. Then I've also talked about the competing styles. These are the people where negotiation is a big game for them, and every negotiation, whether it's how much they're paying somebody, if it's not in a fixed price environment, to clean their car, to buy anything at all, everything is a big negotiation. They have to win, and they're very competitive. And these kind of styles can be quite disruptive sometimes because they could end up damaging relationships, which is not good. Then the last style is compromising. These are people who love, just offering concessions as quickly as possible so they can close. So again, I think my dominant style is a mix between collaborating and compromising. I don't like competing, but because I know this, when I'm getting into a negotiation, I have to sort of learn very quickly about the other people and prepare in a way that my dominant preference when it comes to negotiation style doesn't negatively impact the negotiation. So again, these are just flags you should be aware of so that you can prepare adequately. So the resources that I've mapped out for you are a few books. The concepts from these books I've summarized for you, but if you want to go into detail, then you have Getting to the Yes. Between Getting to the Yes, Getting More is Stuart Diamond. He's the Wharton professor as well. And Never Split the Difference is quite fascinating because the Chris who wrote it was a hostage negotiator for the FBI. So yeah, this is not about money. This is about people's lives. and very, very tense situations. So he has a lot of lessons learned about empathy and, listening to people and understanding where they're coming from and how that literally changes the pace and the outcome of the negotiations. Then there's bargaining for advantage as well. So these are the resources that you can dig into deeper if this is an area that you want to. We have a brief case that we circulated earlier about the renal case. I hope most of you have had the chance to read it. Most of the numbers in there are fictitious, and it's just to give you a quick chance to go over. I have checked the time and it's almost 12:30. So we'll cut the discussion down to 10 minutes with you in the breakout rooms, 15 minutes tops, depending on how it's going. But if you haven't had the chance to read the case, once you go into the breakout rooms, just take a couple of minutes to scan through. Again, the point of the case is not for you to go and do any primary research or Google anything. All the information you need is in there. It's just for you to start using the boundaries and the tips you have heard on negotiation in sort of a structured, safe environment for us to discuss. So Mary, can you just explain to them how they are being put in the breakout rooms and move them into their rooms, and they'll have 10 minutes. We'll announce to you when it's time, and then we can come back.
Yes. So we have about 36 people on the call. We have 6 breakout rooms, maximum 6 people in the breakout. So I will assign everyone to a breakout room. You should receive a pop-up on your screen to join the breakout room. Kindly click on the join and move to your breakout room. Once we're in the breakout room, would appreciate if you could appoint maybe one person just to kind of lead a discussion and also facilitate the conversation, basically. So I'm opening up the breakout room now.
And Mary, before they all head out, so we'll try and pop into their rooms to answer any questions. But there are 3 questions at the end of the case. So the first one is, what is the founder's alternative to the valuation they have received? What is the reasonable amount range within which the deal can be agreed on before due diligence? And the key terms the transaction advisor Sena can negotiate on for RenaCare. What we'll do is, since there are 6 breakout rooms, it means there are going to be 6 people that take the answers to these questions. When we come back, we'll put up a Menti poll so that we can quickly put this up. And there might be whiteboards up that we could put up to facilitate as well. So then we just put this up so that we can quickly have the discussion. So your pop-ups should have shown up now. Please join your breakout room and we'll let you know when it's time to come back. Have a productive discussion.
So you should have received the pop-up to join your breakout room. Kindly click on the join to move to your breakout room.
Mary, Ernest is not assigned.
Ernest is not assigned. Okay, then he just joined in. Okay. Okay. So Ernest, you're assigned to breakout room 6. Do let me know if you see the pop-up. If not, I'll reassign you again so the pop-up shows. So I think room 6, we just have 2 people, Smith and Yao. Please, do you see the pop-up to join your breakout? If yes, kindly click on the join to move to your breakout room.
Sorry, I'm joining. I was in the call, so sorry. Joined.
Oh, no worries.
Andrew, let me see.
Then Andrew, okay, he just joined. So let me assign him to room 6. Andrew, if I assigned you to room 6, you should receive the pop-up now. Kindly click on that to join room 6. Okay. Do you see the pop-up?
Yeah, I clicked it and it sent me back here. Would you mind sending it again, please?
Sure. Okay, so you've moved now, right?
Okay, finally, everybody was able to join.
Yes. So I'll move to one of the rooms. I think you can join any room since you're co-host.
Yeah, I'll keep go. Which one are you going to? I go to another one.
Let me see one that doesn't have an IGH member.
So we started around 12:30. Let's aim for 12:40, depending on how things. No, 12:45 because we had problems adding people. But I'll check in a room and see how it's going. So I'm going to number 1 to start.
Okay, sure. So I've set the timer. I would broadcast it in a message if it's 10 minutes, 5 minutes to time. Hello, everyone. So we have the case study. I'm not sure if you received it, but it was shared also in the main room. I'm going to drop it in the chat here as well. And then we can discuss. You can take a minute, 5 minutes to read the case study, and then we answer the questions at the end of the case study. Do we all have access to the case study? Hello, sorry, can anyone hear me? Thomas, N.S. Smith, Andrew, can anyone hear me?
Yes, I have it.
I hear you.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay, so I've dropped the case study in the chat. You should have access to that, but if you already have access to it and if you've viewed it, there are a couple of questions below that we need to discuss. So maybe we take 5 minutes, no, 3 minutes to read, and then we start a discussion. Does that sound good?
Hi, Mary. That's fine. Okay. I won't be able to read. I'm driving. I'll just wait for everyone to read and then we can discuss. I believe I can still make some valuable content.
Well noted on that. But do you have the opportunity to read it ahead of the call?
No, please.
Okay, all right. Let me share my screen. Let's see. I'm sharing my screen as well. Just in case if that will be useful. We have 5 minutes, and so if we're done reading, is it possible we discuss the questions? So it's saying that Senate is leading the negotiations on the term sheets before Med Capital due diligence. Terms will be finalized after the due diligence. Question 1 is asking, what is the founder's best alternative to the USD 1 million proposed valuation? Any comment on that?
Oh,
Yes.
yeah, if you don't mind, can you give like 2 extra minutes? I'm still reading the paper. I don't know if maybe that is done, but if you- I could see, sorry.
Sure. Let me stop sharing because I'm not able to see everybody else. I wanted to come back and broadcast the message. to
Yeah,
the-
it's okay. I mean, this is just to get them started into creating these boundaries in negotiations. And you know, since we broadcast 1 o'clock, even if we run over 5 minutes, I don't want us to run over significantly. Otherwise, people will drop off. We already lost like a ton of people. As soon as we said we're breaking them out into cases, we lost like
Yeah.
like
People
so.
will drop off. So I think maybe when
Yes.
they come to the main room, then we discuss briefly because my group, I doubt they discussed anything.
Yeah, so you
One-
let's give them that. It's 2 more minutes. Let's do the 2 minutes and bring them back. I'm going to look at my, actually, we're not even going to do the mentee thing anymore because very few of them actually discussed. So we'll just go into the discussion. I'll let a couple of them answer and then we'll do the key takeaways and wrap that section up. The last section, I just knew we're going to run out of time, so it's actually pretty short. But I hope Mohammed has the take in terms of the first question, which is what's the best alternative for the 1 million valuation that the company had been given, MedCap had given to RenaCare. So I'm just looking to see if anyone will put their hands up. Everybody's quiet. All right, so here is just the background because I had to explain the case to a couple of them.
Can I give it a shot?
Yes, go ahead, Emmanuel.
Okay, all right. If I were to be the founder for this thing, I think I'll go in for the 2 million evaluation. Because from the data, they've been in operation for 5 years. Then the 2022, I think their returns was a little over 1.7 million USD. So
1.7.
Come again?
It's about 1 million.
Okay, all right. So from that evaluation, considering the number of years, and also there is this compound annual growth rate of 8% between 2024 to 2034, which is a very massive rate with an estimated market value of 185 million. So from this analysis, if I were to be the founder, I will go for the evaluation that they've already given. Thank you.
Thanks, Emmanuel. So anyone else wanting to take a shot, Ebenezer?
Okay, so I agree with a few things Emmanuel said. And what I wanted to say was, I think that they could push back a bit on the $1 million valuation, taking into consideration their expertise, how long they've survived, and the fact that they will still have to they've put in a lot of sweat equity and they still have to do that going forward. I think that 1 million is a little on the low. And so maybe if they did maybe a 1.5, it would be more like, I would say, more appropriate, if I can't find a better word, I'd say. That's what I will push for. Looking at losing control in the beginning, I feel like 66% is on the high. And so if they could do something around 48 to maybe 50, something less than 50, so they still have controlling stake in the beginning, it's helpful, because it looks like they have to go for subsequent rounds in the future. And this is what I think. But none of this is cast in stone. I will still negotiate. Yeah.
Okay, So
Yeah.
thanks everyone. And unfortunately, in the interest of time, I have to wrap this side up so we can do the other couple of sections. So thanks for your contributions. Again, the purpose of the case is for us to start really looking at how we can push back, how we can set the boundaries of the discussion. So the first one was, essentially what's their alternative? What really can they do if they don't go for the MedCap valuation and the MedCap term sheet that they've given? So if you look at it, there are sort of two paths. Number one, because they've been around for a little bit, they can go for debt because they have 5 years worth of operations. Their revenues, at least for the year in question that Senna was looking at, was about $1 million. They are making net profit. So they have track record to go for bank debt. But if you look at their income statement, they don't have any interests, which means they are not servicing any debts. And they've bootstrapped, they've used their relationships. So it tells you the mindset of this kind of the trio who founded the company, or the four of them, that they are not really interested in debt. It's a possible path, but it's something that potentially they might not be interested in. The other path that they could use is IGF. So again, because the company is throwing off, about 130K USD on an annual basis right now, potentially they could aggregate that, harvest enough to be able to start the next center. And if you do back of the envelope calculations, it means about every 2 years, based on the cost of the dialysis machines, the number they want to have per center, they could add on about 1 center every 2 years, which means by end of 2028, they're only going to have, 3 more centers in addition to the 2 they have. So 5 in total, not the 9. So they are not going to get all that benefits that they want. The third path is, they are paying themselves well, which means potentially if they cut back on whatever they're using their salaries for, they could invest in their company again, just like they did in the beginning. So again, these are 3 potential pathways, right? That they can use if they don't want to have this conversation with MedCap or another new equity investor. And based on sort of their income levels that you can sort of back extrapolate from the fixed cost, it's more likely that IGF plus the existing shareholders reinvesting is the most likely partner they have. But the issue with that partner is we have this regulatory change, which is going to come up, which could take out all the tax concessions around this business, and it might not be that viable. So their partner is not a very, very strong partner if they don't take MedCap or a negotiated version of MedCap proposal. So the reasonable amount range, again, if you look at it, the high level valuation that Senna calculated, who is your transaction advisor, she's getting 1.7. The people are offering 1. So there's definitely a lot of room for negotiation. So first, Senna has to do more work and do additional valuation metrics to set the boundaries better. I'm pretty sure that once she does that, she's going to actually either move the needle up a little bit and then come up with a range which is probably between 1.3 to about 2 million, something like that. So her boundary is going to get a bit broader, right, with a lower end and higher end. And now she would have the fair standard benchmarks that she's using in her back pocket to negotiate with MedCap to be able to move them forward. And she has the walkaway points. The walkaway point is the founders don't want to cede control of their business. So that automatically gives you where you can end up. And in terms of the areas she could really, really negotiate hard on, if you look at the term sheet, right, there are a couple of areas around the equity. There's a dividend policy of 25%. This is a very cash flow positive business. It tends to spit off a lot of net income. So they really could increase their dividend policy. And if that is the case, and dividend policy is going to go up, then they can be more generous with the valuation they are offering, because they will start seeing the returns very, very quickly, the way the business runs. So that's an area she can negotiate hard on to get the dividend policy changed so that the valuation could potentially go up. And all these points she's negotiating is concessions with the ultimate goal of trying to get the valuation to go up. Another one is the control, the directorships. MedCap is trying to get 3 seats on a 5-member board locked to them. So this is not 3 seats that they are going to sort of appoint together. They are wanting to take those seats, and the founders don't want to lose control. So immediately that's a red flag. It's an interest the founders have expressly said. So there's no point mapping out call after call after call with MedCap arguing negotiation when a point like this is right there and you haven't been able to really push back on it for the founders. Then lastly, the MedCap is also asking for drag and tag rights, which essentially are rights that if they invest in the business, drag along means if in the future they find a new buyer for the company, and the founders are now minority, they can drag the founders to join that transaction, whether or not they want to. It's legally binding. Then tag means if the founders found investors, they MedCap can tag along and sell their shares as well, whether or not the new investors want to. So drag and tag rights are very, you lose control with those rights, and that's something that Sena has to really argue on. So again, if you do have some time on the back end, tomorrow is a holiday, please read the case if you didn't have a chance to, and look at how the boundaries could be formed and what areas as an advisor you could really flag to the founders or negotiate on their behalf. Because most of the time I get onto calls with advisors and there's one point they want to negotiate to heaven and back, but in the bigger picture, if they look at other areas that they are not analyzing at all, concessions could be made and the pie will get bigger for everybody, and everyone will be happy on the back end. So that's the key takeaway from that case. I'm just going to share so we can do the last couple of slides before we do the survey. So again, just wrapping up, it's important for Sena to do more homework. Sorry, did anyone talk?
Yeah.
Please, okay, let me just mute you. Please remember to stay on mute. So for you to be able to expand the conversation and have more areas where you can have compromises, you need to bring all the issues to the table. You don't fixate on valuation and forget all the shareholder rights, control issues, who bears due diligence costs, and things like that, because at the end of the day, that really matters. And again, you have to prepare. If you don't know what your walkaway point or your partner is and you don't establish those boundaries, you could have great conversations and lead nowhere. Again, bringing the loss aversion up again. Remember that for the founders in this case, because they have this significant interest in not losing control of the company, you need to remember that and use that to your benefit in the negotiation with MedCap if they really want to do the deal. And then also remember that typically it's so hard when you start from a certain position and you are the you are offering a higher price for you are the seller and you want to sell something at a certain price. It's very, very hard for you to come down. So in the case that we did, if Sena has triangulated all her methods and let's say she ends up at 1.8 or 2 million, it's harder for her to come down. And that's why it's important that you have a zone and a range and not one solitary number you are working towards. So there was a question. Somebody raised their hand.
Yes, please.
Yes, go ahead.
I know the case is hypothetical, but I want to bring it into real life perspective. Considering the tax that would have been taken off after 24 months of this scenario, and looking at the expenses, sometimes I want to look at the long picture. What happens when later you realize that after the analysis, within a couple of years, like 5 years, 10 years, if you are not careful, things might go down the drain and it can affect the operation of the business? Can we also think in that aspect? Because I believe half a loaf is better than none.
Yes. So the bigger picture is important. And right now, the rankle in the case was that the regulatory environment was potentially going to change. So the window to have their concessions was potentially going to change. We don't know if the government will change its mind. We don't know if in the competitive landscape, other people are coming to market as well. We don't know a lot of things, and this is only what time can reveal. So the best information you have at the point you're negotiating is what is going to guide you. And for all my years in management consulting and equity and then angels and entrepreneurs, I've never seen any operating or financial model when it, in real life, fast forward 3-5 years, go exactly according to plan. Never, ever. Which means that the devil is in the details when it comes to execution. And as things evolve, if you decide to go down a certain path, you will have to pivot or make modifications in whatever your strategy is, because real life is not black and white. It just goes up and down. So you just use the best information you have. You can model for sort of any variations you expect, and then jump into it. And your question actually dovetails us perfectly into the last section, which is very quick. It's just a couple of slides. And this goes to the nitty-gritty of the question you had. When you look at a company, whether it's a big company or a small company, and this is a model Bain and Company uses, right? You look at the company holistically, and it's got various value creation levers or elements, operating elements. You have the founders, they have their values, they bring that to the table with, they have their strategy they've created for the business. And then when you parse out the business, you have the leaders. They've put in some organizational structure, and their management system. You have all kinds of processes. They are hiring people. And then you have your structure and accountabilities. And all these things come together to create the financial results that you're seeing. It's a lot of elements. I went through it very fast, but look at it, it's a lot. And yet, when we go into negotiations, especially for investment, all these elements somehow, some ways are structured and modeled. And then you have your financial model with your scenarios and your sensitivity analysis. And you expect to invest or not invest, or if you're trying to look at potential clients and say whether you accept or reject them, you're trying to do that based on all this information you've reduced into, some financial model that you use to assess the situation. So this is the sort of parting shots for you, that financial modeling is great. It's a way to really reduce a lot of convoluted information into a usable format that you can use for decision making, when especially you take the core anchors. You want to see the valuation. You want to see how responsive the financials are to changes and effects, like the FX movements we've had in Ghana over the past 2 years. You want to see the response of the financial performance to inflation. And to various supplier changes, things like that. But don't forget that despite this reduction you're dealing with a business, and the business is not as clean as all the modules, all the flexibility you'll put into Excel. And this, it's important to negotiate as fairly as possible and as broadly as possible, because you need to bring in all these elements into whatever shareholding and other terms that you're putting up. Apologies, we have run over by the time we estimated. What we're going to do is that the feedback form is already posted. We need these filled because it helps us create new course content and also evaluate us as facilitators so we can improve. So please be generous and fill it out. I'm going to stay on for people who have questions that they want to ask. We had planned to have at least 20-30 minutes of Q&A, so I'll stay on as long as people have questions. You don't have to feel obliged to stay on the course if you don't want to, but I'll be on for those who have questions and I'll address them. But please, it's quite important. We've lost quite a lot of people along the way, so it's only about 20 or so people, so we actually need everyone to fill the questionnaires to help us out. Thank you again for attending, and we'll give you some minutes to fill the questionnaire, and then we'll open the floor for Q&A. And it's a short questionnaire. It shouldn't take you more than a couple of minutes to fill. So Mohammed is reporting that the responses are coming in. Thank you. We'll just give it 1 more minute, and then you can start putting up your hands, and I'll call you if you have questions. Okay, so if you have any questions, please put your hand up. And if you're still filling your questionnaire, please go on and I'll start addressing them. You can raise your hand and speak, or you can type it in the chat and we'll pick it up.